Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for this introduction to special education. We are just so excited to get things started, and we're learning as we go in this and navigate in Zoom land. So thank you guys for your patience. Just a few housekeeping slides that I'm going to go through. Jerry's going to take over after I finish. Let's go. So just some tips on the sound for Zoom. So on the, you can join by the audio by your speakers or your computer or your phone speakers. When you joining an audio conference is preferred, so that you can get a better experience and a richer experience. Your microphone is located at the bottom left-hand corner of the Zoom meeting window, with the green arrow that is indicating on your screen. To mute and unmute yourself, please click on the microphone. When there's a red line, you are muted, and when it is green, you are live. So just for right now and for the purposes of this training, we will all be muted. And once we go to questions, you can ask them in the chat or raise your hand, and then we will unmute you. One second. It's taking a little bit. There we go. For camera, you located, it's also at the bottom left-hand corner of your Zoom meeting window, indicated by the green arrow, and you can turn it off and on just the same as the microphone. When there is a red line, the camera is off, and when it is green, the camera is on, so others can see you. For the purposes of this meeting right now, we're going to turn off all the cameras to allow for the stream not to have a lag time. So also, if you have some tips and some chat information, some questions, you can do that through the chat. There's a three dot under more. You can click on that and you can find the chat box, and you can also direct it either to the panelists or to everyone. My name is Nicole, so I'm under Pave staff, so you can send it directly to me, and I will get all the questions and put them in the order that they're received, and Jerry we'll get to that as we go through the Q&A portion. Also, you can also raise your hand, just like I was mentioning it. You can go through the more little icon that you have with the three dots, and you can indicate that you want to raise your hand if you have a question at some point. This is a great way to let the presenter and the technology team know that you want to ask a question or talk live. So there's other tools that we can do and that you can take into account, but for right now, we're just going to use the chat box or raise hand when needed if you want to take a turn. And also, please, we will be recording this presentation. So if you have any questions or anything like that, please try to make them more generalized, because it will be recorded, and that information will be shared. So we will be able to edit any information that is more detailed, but let's try to keep it as a general for everybody to get the information and feel a richer experience. One second. Hey, some group guidelines we have. Please silence your phones, reduce distractions. We're all at home, so we're probably very distracted. So turn off the TV and music, please. Silence notifications from email and social media. You can ask questions and comments in the chat, and mute if you have ongoing noise in the background. So with that, I will have Jerry get started, and I will turn off my camera so that we have better connection, and you can take it away.
Welcome, everybody. And I'm going to be looking at the PowerPoint from my computer. So just a note that Nicole will be switching the slides for me, and hopefully we'll all stay on the same page. So, welcome to this overview of special education. I hope that everyone is well and that whatever your circumstances look like today, that you are taking time to do something in kindness to yourself. Whether you're a parent or a professional or both, you're likely in a position today to be caring for others who may have high needs for support, and practicing self-care is imperative. So my name is Jerry Clark, and I'm a Parent Resource Coordinator with Parent Training and Information, which we refer to as PTI at Washington Pave. Pave stands for Partnerships for Action, Voices for Empowerment. Pave is a nonprofit agency that has supported families in Washington since 1979. Our home office is in Tacoma, and we have resource coordinators throughout the state who provide support and training related to special education. Our PTI is funded through a grant from the U.S. Department of Education. Please note that the contents of this presentation do not necessarily represent the policy of the U.S. Department of Education, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal government. Also, Pave is not a legal service agency and cannot provide advocacy, advice, or legal representation. Our goal is to empower families by providing information and access to resources. Next slide, please. So this presentation offers an overview of the protections available to students with disabilities. The State Department of Education released guidance this Monday on March 23rd that calls on school districts to provide some form of instruction by March 30th, which is Monday. If schools are operating, they do have responsibility to provide equitable access and appropriate programming for students with disabilities. That said, leadership statewide is calling for patience, flexibility, and creativity. Our PTI strives to partner with families and schools in creatively addressing these topics. A good place to begin is to consider what makes learning meaningful, accessible, and appropriate in light of individual circumstances. We'll talk about that today in the context of student rights. During this webinar, we'll look at Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which protects rights for equity and access. We'll also look at the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the IDEA, which is the law that describes how special education is delivered through an individualized education program, the IEP. The end of today's presentation will provide more information about how to seek support from various agencies, including Pave. Next slide, please. So education rights are like a pyramid, and children who qualify at the top of the pyramid have all of these protections. At the bottom of our educational rights pyramid is ESSA, which stands for Every Student Succeeds Act. ESSA provides for a free public education to ensure that every child achieves. In the middle is the Rehabilitation Act, which includes Section 504. This law provides civil rights protections for individuals with identified disabilities throughout the lifespan. Section 504 defines disability broadly as an impairment that significantly impacts a major life activity. That might include anything from breathing or walking to socializing or learning. Note that Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, affords similar protections. Any agency that receives public funds is bound by Section 504 and the ADA and is required to provide accommodations. A person in a wheelchair, for example, has the civil right to access a library, a school, or a museum with ramps and accessible entrances. Accommodating hidden disabilities can seem more complicated, but the rights are still protected. At the top of the pyramid is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the IDEA, which provides a menu of special education services for eligible students. The IDEA provides a very specific process for the delivery of special education. To qualify for an IEP, a student in public education meets criteria in one of 14 eligibility categories, which we'll look at in further detail during this presentation. Next slide, please. So here's a quote from Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. The law states that no otherwise qualified individual with a disability in the United States shall solely by reason of her or his disability be excluded from the participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Keep in mind our pyramid and that students with IEPs or Section 504 plans are eligible for these civil rights protections to ensure that they receive equitable benefit from a government-funded program or service, and that includes school. So let's take a moment to consider the word equity. It doesn't just mean equal. Next slide, please. When we talk about supports and services for a student with a disability, we can ask whether that help is providing equity. Equal opportunity would mean that students all get the same help. You can see from this picture that getting the same help doesn't give all students the same opportunity. The little guy can't see the game. The help that makes access to learning equitable is what meets the standard of FAPE. Free, appropriate public education. We'll talk more about FAPE in a moment. Students eligible for help under Section 504 and the IDEA have a right to FAPE. Students with known disabilities have the right to the help and productivity enhancers they need to access the same opportunities for success that all students have. If they need something specific that gives them the same opportunity to learn, grow, and benefit from their education, then their civil right is to get the boost they need to have an equitable opportunity. Next slide, please. You might consider today what would make distance learning accessible for an individual student that you know. What would be the boost needed for a student with a specific disability circumstance to have equitable access to a specific area of learning? If you have ideas about accessibility, you can share those ideas with your IEP team and the local school district. You can also type them into the chat box. We'll collect these ideas and share them out through our website. If you think of something after this webinar, go ahead and send me an email. And my email address is jclark@wapave.org. So this has been an overview about Section 504. If you want more detail, you can type the number 504 into the search bar on our website, which is wapave.org. wapave.org. A slide later in this presentation will also provide more detail about accessing information on our website. Next slide, please. So we're going to now talk about the law at the top of that student rights pyramid, the IDEA. People often date the IDEA to the 1970s, but the name of the law was actually different in the beginning. The Education for All Handicapped Children Act of 1975 was the first federal law that provided a menu of services for students with disabilities in public education. It's helpful to know some of this history to learn the unique vocabulary of special education. Since 1975, students with disabilities have been entitled to a free public education specialized to meet their needs. Parent input has been a key aspect of the law since its early years. Also important from the beginning is the concept of education in the least restrictive environment, LRE, which means students get the help they need in regular classrooms to the maximum extent appropriate. Since 1975, parents have also had the right to very specific processes if they have conflicts with the school. Next slide, please. Special education law was amended and renamed the IDEA in 1990. The concept of a free, appropriate public education, FAPE, became the overarching principle of this law. Pardon me. Virtually every conversation about the entitlement of a student in special education is about what truly makes the IEP appropriate to meet a specific student's needs. A student has the right to FAPE regardless of the nature or severity of a disability, and the local school district is responsible to provide access to FAPE. Next slide, please. There are 6 general themes woven throughout the IDEA. The first is the concept of FAPE, that overarching principle that a student with a qualifying disability is entitled to an educational program that is specifically designed to meet the unique needs. A student also is entitled to an appropriate evaluation, an IEP that is reasonably calculated to help the student make progress in light of the circumstances of disability, and education in the least restrictive environment to the maximum extent appropriate. Under the IDEA's 5th principle, parents and students have the right to participate in educational decision-making, and schools are responsible to encourage and accommodate that participation. Pardon me. The 6th primary principle is that families have the right to dispute decisions through complaint processes that are outlined in the IDEA's procedural safeguards. Next slide, please. I'm going to take a quick drink of water. Administration of the IDEA has been impacted by various legal rulings over the years. An example is a 2017 Supreme Court ruling referred to as Andrew F., which is the name of a child whose parents took the school district to court. In that case, the court ruled that trivial progress toward goals does not meet the standard of FAPE. The ruling also included firm language to reinforce progress toward grade level standards and parent participation in the IEP process. The court's wording included the key phrases highlighted in purple on this slide. To meet the standard of FAPE, which is referred to in the ruling as a school district's substantive obligation, a school must offer a child an individualized education program, which is the IEP, reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress in light of the child's circumstances. Next slide, please. So IEP starts with evaluation. The IDEA includes a provision called the Child Find Mandate. Child Find requires school districts to locate, identify, and evaluate all children within their boundaries who have known or suspected disabilities that might significantly impact access to education. The Child Find Mandate applies to all children, birth through age 21 or until they graduate from high school. The mandate applies to children who attend private schools, public schools, children who are homeless, and foster children. It protects children who are suspected of having a disability that may significantly impact access to school, including children who may be receiving passing grades and advancing from grade to grade. The IDEA requires that an evaluation be fair and non-discriminatory. That means that if a student is nonverbal, he's tested using nonverbal techniques. If a student speaks Spanish, she gets tested in Spanish. An unbiased approach also requires that schools gather information from different sources using a variety of instruments and methods. A single measurement, such as an IQ test, doesn't fulfill this requirement. Next slide, please. The evaluation determines whether the child has a disability, and if so, how that disability impacts education. If significant adverse educational impact is found, then the evaluation determines whether specially designed instruction is needed. If all three criteria are met, a student qualifies for an IEP. The evaluation uses state standards to determine the child's ability to make progress in the general education curriculum. However, the measurements aren't all about the deficits. Testing also identifies a child's strengths, and IEP team uses that information to create an IEP that builds on those strengths. Next slide, please. Sometimes the school or a medical provider recommends that a student be evaluated for special education. Sometimes a family member makes that referral. Pave recommends that families request a formal educational evaluation in writing. Our website includes a sample letter and instructions for submitting a request. An evaluation request letter should include all identifying information for the student and a clear explanation of the concerns. Attached letters from medical providers or outside specialists may support the request. Next slide, please. So this timeline is provided by the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, OSPI, which is the agency responsible for oversight of all public schools and non-public agencies in Washington state. These timelines vary from state to state, but these are Washington's requirements. So after someone makes a referral, the district responds in writing within 25 school days. After a legal parent or guardian provides formal written consent, the district has 35 school days to finish the evaluation. If a district is evaluating after there's been a disciplinary action, that timeline speeds up. Note that these deadlines are based on a school schedule. Holidays, weekends, and full school closures don't count as school days. Next slide, please. If the evaluation indicates that a student has a qualifying disability, the impairment will meet criteria in one of the 14 categories listed on this slide. These categories are broad and capture a wide variety of conditions that can cause barriers to learning. For example, other health impairment is a catch-all for ADHD and many other disabilities related to specific medical diagnoses. Note that emotional disturbance is a category of disability. A student with a mental health condition that significantly impacts access to education can qualify for an IEP regardless of grades or academic abilities. Note that 13 of these categories cover a student from ages 13 to 21. But developmental delay is a qualifying category for children in early learning through age 8. Our presentation today focuses on a section of the IDEA called Part B. Before age 3, a child can qualify for services through another part of the IDEA, which is Part C. Part C programs are administered in a family-centered way with evaluations and programming that are somewhat different from those for school-age children. Pave has materials on our website about early learning. Next slide, please. When a student qualifies for special education, an IEP is developed. Our website provides a full-length article about the IEP and how to understand its various components and participate in its development. We also provide an article about SMART goals and how parents can participate in goal setting and progress monitoring. So if you type IEP or SMART into the search bar at wapave.org, you can find those articles. This is a basic outline of the parts of an IEP listed on this slide. It's important to understand that the IEP is built from data collected by an educational evaluation. The data determines where the student begins, the present levels of performance, and how specialized instruction, services, programming, and placement will meet the identified needs. If a parent believes that a need is unmet, sometimes it's helpful to review the present levels of performance and see whether they reflect the unmet need. If not, then a new evaluation might be necessary. Next slide, please. Since Pave began back in the late 1970s, we've made it a priority to help families access original source documents about their rights and responsibilities. Here are the formal names of the state and federal guidance documents related to special education process. Next slide, please. Pave's Parent Training and Information Center, our PTI, is a federally funded program. We do provide one-on-one support, training, and information like this that is free for Washington State parents, youth, and professionals who want to better understand how to navigate special education process. To scan through articles and resources, if you click Learning in School on the homepage of our website, you'll find a list of articles. So the blue arrow is pointing to that Learning in School tab. You can search for articles by typing a keyword into the search bar. The red arrow is pointing to the search bar. So after typing your word or words, press the search button to see if it brings up the article. For specific information about student rights during this pandemic, Pave has an article called School Shutdown: Pandemic Guidance for Families Also Impacted by Disability. If you type keywords such as coronavirus, COVID-19, pandemic, or another keyword into the search bar on our website, you will likely find the article. For direct assistance, you can click Get Help from the toolbar in the upper right-hand corner of our homepage. So that purple arrow is pointing to the Get Help tab. Next slide, please. So the Get Help button takes you to a helpline request form and our calendar of events. You can take a look and see if there are any other upcoming events that might meet your needs. We're working on developing additional online learning opportunities during the school closure. If you fill out a helpline request form, please do note that our response time might depend on how many families are waiting already for our support. Next slide, please. So here's a list of our contact information. Again, you can find us online at wapave.org. You can also get help by calling our toll-free number, which is 800-572-7368. And another place for resources and information is our Facebook page. You can follow us at Parent Training and Information of Washington. Next slide, please. Pave has added new links on our website to help families navigate circumstances related to COVID-19. On our homepage, you can find the large blue button labeled View Links. So if you click on View Links, it will open a list of options. Two new options that you can look for with guidance related to the pandemic. One of those is called Links for Learning at Home During School Closure, and that's a resource collection of agencies providing online learning opportunities. Another set of links is called Links to Support Families During the Coronavirus Crisis, and that resource collection is a list of agencies providing information that is specifically related to the pandemic itself. Next slide, please. Our PTI director, Jen Cole, addressed some topics related to educational access during a March 19 podcast, which was hosted by Once Upon a Gene. In addition to providing information about the rights of students with disabilities, she shared her own experiences as a parent of an elementary age student with a disability. A link to that podcast is available within the article on our website that is about the pandemic. The next few slides provide a few additional resources that are included in that article as well. Next slide, please. So the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction, OSPI, again, which is the state agency charged with overseeing and supporting Washington's 295 public school districts and 7 state tribal education compact schools. As communities respond to the COVID-19 outbreak, OSPI offers a downloadable guide for parents and families. This guide was released March 7, 2020, and OSPI is providing additional updated resources and guidance through its website. You can find OSPI at k12.wa.us, and they have a page committed to COVID-19 related resources and guidance for schools and families. Next slide, please. The U.S. Department of Education also has a website page dedicated to topics related to the pandemic. Links are included in Pave's website article, or you can search for ed.gov. It's just ed.gov. Next slide, please. So one document, for example, that is available for download from the Department of Education is a fact sheet about student civil rights while schools are closed. This one was released on March 16th, 2020. There have been additional resources released since then. Next slide, please. So this slide is just a reminder that Pave is not a legal service agency and cannot provide advocacy, advice, or legal representation. Our goal is to empower families by providing information and access to resources. Next slide, please. And I do want to remind you to practice self-care. This is a difficult time. Thank you so much for your participation today, and I'm going to be happy to take some questions from you. So I'm going to get back on the webinar, and if Nicole wants to put us back on video, that'd be fine.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, this is your time. I've also added some links as Jerry was speaking about, for the OSPI link and the U.S. Department of Education link. And I have a question that says, do our schools have to find ways to provide related services like PT, OT, and speech?
So the OSPI issued a document just early this week that lists some of the ways that schools are going to be requested to do their best. And it's, it provides guidance, but it leaves room for what's reasonable and what's possible. And right now, the most important thing is public safety. So, if there is a way in each individual circumstance for something to be set up, then, families can certainly attempt to set up those services. But if it is not safe in light of public safety, then there also is room for agencies to say, right now, this is not appropriate.
Okay, I have another question. What kind of communication should I expect from my teachers in the school?
So again, I think school districts are still trying to figure that out in an individual basis. And in the state of Washington, school districts do have a lot of independence. But OSPI's guidance is that school districts should be reaching out to families soon as things come back online. Hopefully there's somebody within your IEP team that you have a contact number for, an email address or a text line or some access point to get in touch with your IEP team manager so that you can make contact. That would be ideal. And if you're having a hard time making contact with your school, OSPI on its resources does list all of the districts, and there's some direct links. So you could, if your school's not reaching out to you and you don't have contact information, you can reach out to the school district in an attempt to make those contacts.
Okay, I don't see any more questions. Any more questions, everyone? Do you need to raise your hand or anything like that? I don't see any, Jerry.
Here's one. What happens to the goals and progress from this year? I saw that one just pop up in the chat.
Okay, great.
And so this is a really good time to take a look at that IEP. You really need to know what's in it, to know what the goals are. And any education that does happen in a distance learning kind of way during this time can get recorded, even if it's just an informal notebook where you keep track of what kind of learning is happening. And if there is maybe some regression, the more that you keep track of the learning that's happening or not happening and what the goals included, the more informed your conversations with your IEP team will be when you are able to get together, either virtually or in person. I hope that answers the question. Feel free to ask a follow-up.
Oh, there's another one. Can you touch on evaluations and if a child is advancing from grade to grade? If the school does not see an adverse educational impact, they may not even consider evaluating. What are the options?
There were several parts to that question. So remember that the child find mandate states that a child with a known or suspected disability that might significantly impact access to learning has a right to an appropriate evaluation. So adverse educational impact is determined through the evaluation process. If the evaluation doesn't find adverse educational impact, then the family has a right to request any information they need to understand that decision. And if the family disagrees with that decision, they do have protections through their procedural safeguards. They have the right to contest that decision. Does that answer your question?
I have another question while in case they want to elaborate.
Okay.
And it
Yeah.
says, if I am working as an essential staff, are the children at schools doing learning? If I am working as essential staff.
I'm not sure I understand the question. So you mean if you're employed, are you essential to the school, or are you referring to being an essential staff member elsewhere and your own children's access to learning? I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah, let's do the first one that you said, to if you're essential to the school, and see while they elaborate. It says healthcare professionals, children at childcare and school.
Nicole, can you just back up? What's the
Yeah.
question?
It says, if I am working as essential staff, are the
Uh-huh.
children at schools doing learning? And then they elaborated with healthcare professional, children at childcare at school. I'm thinking maybe if a professional is going, saving people's lives, what is going to happen for the learning for the child that's being in healthcare?
Yeah,
Childcare, I guess.
I'm afraid that's outside my scope. But what you have the right to do is check with the district and see what can be done. I mean, basically, there are going to be individualized circumstances all over the state that can really only be addressed through an individualized process. And that involves school staff, that might involve OSPI if there is confusion or uncertainty about how to address, a specific unique circumstance. And I presume that OSPI's staff are accessible, in whatever remote working environment they have. So, I think as this OSPI made it clear in its guidance that this is a public health crisis and
Yeah.
public health is primary. So, what education can be safely provided, OSPI is encouraging districts to provide. But everybody is putting public health first, and essential health workers are always going to be prioritized here.
I have
That's
another
what I'm
question.
hearing. Yeah.
Yeah. It says, what about behavior and discipline? Are these reasons for evaluations for IEPs?
Well, yes. A student who is, frequently losing access to education because of discipline, because of behavior, can be evaluated to determine if the behavior is a disability. Remember that three-part criteria for evaluation. Is there a disability that's significantly impacting access to learning? And is there a need for specially designed instruction? So it could be determined that the student has a behavior disability that is significantly impacting that access to education, and that the student needs specially designed instruction in behavior and skill building around coping strategies, for example. So yeah, behavior and discipline often can be the triggering reason that a student is evaluated for special education services.
Okay. Well, I think that's the questions that I have so far. Let's give it a little bit more in case somebody else has another question that they're typing up.
Did we have any chat comments about creativity around what makes school appropriate and equitably accessible during this time? Did anybody have
Yeah.
any thoughts on that?
Yeah, they said we use special seating equipment for writing, special spaces for testing, breaking up my daughter's work, and then a
Mm,
paraprofessional to support health needs.
okay.
Somebody said, what about dispute resolution process during COVID?
That is addressed in a pretty open-ended way in the guidance from OSPI. If school is in session, school districts are encouraged to follow timelines to the best of their ability, and make notes if there is an extenuating circumstance that is not enabling them to meet certain timelines. So it's a good question, and there's a little bit of guidance from OSPI about that. I think ultimately those things are still, certainly the procedural safeguards are available to families if school is in session. If school is resumed, so when school resumes, and if that school means distance learning, it's still school, then those protections are in place. How they logistically are managed is going to, again, have to be an individualized process. And I think there is, you know, reason for everyone, to be patient with some of those processes when people are working remotely and still trying to figure things out.
Yes. If I have a child that is refusing to go to school during normal times, is that a reason? Is that a reason for services?
School refusal can be an indicator that the student is unable to access learning, and a family member could request evaluation. Remember, we do have that option of using the letter that we provide on our website if you want to request an evaluation. And remember, again, the Child Find mandate says if a student has a known or suspected disability that might significantly impact access to learning, then the student can be evaluated. So evaluation in the area of social emotional learning might reveal something, is there a disabling condition that is creating that impact, that inability to go? You know, is there an underlying anxiety condition, for example, that is a significant disability? And that could be a justification for getting that evaluation going, and it could potentially be determined that the student meets eligibility criteria, perhaps under that emotional disturbance category. So I saw another question pop up asking, do I have to have a medical diagnosis in order to be evaluated for special education? And the answer is no. For example, and this is an area where this question gets asked a lot. If there is a suspicion that the student has autism, for example, but the family has been unable to access an evaluation in the medical arena to determine whether the student has a medical diagnosis of autism, that doesn't mean that the school can't evaluate. So the school actually can look at what's going on with the student, what sorts of behaviors, what sorts of, social communication is going on with the student, and they can evaluate that to determine whether there is significant educational impact and whether the student needs specially designed instruction. And that could all be set up. If the student is eligible, that could all be set up before a student is medically diagnosed.
Thank you. And then there's a website that somebody shared. This is coronavirus.wa.gov. If you have any more information, it's the state's website for pandemic, the situation, and includes resources for families and possibly can address questions related to employment and labor. So I have another question. So to add to the question above, a parent does not need to provide a doctor's note for any reason?
The parent doesn't have to provide a doctor's note. However, if you have a letter from a doctor, and let me back up. Parents decide how much medical information they wish to share with the school. That is voluntary. So you decide as a parent what medical information you want the school to have about your student. Medical documentation can support a parent's request for an educational evaluation. It can also support the development of an IEP. So some families, for example, would have a doctor write a specific letter that says, here's the diagnosis, here's what I see as potential educational impact, and perhaps the doctor even has a few recommendations in terms of helping the student access school. So, but that is up to the parent's discretion, what they wish to share. A parent could explain the circumstances that the parent believes indicates disability could be significantly impacting access to learning in school as the justification for their request for an evaluation. And without providing medical information, if the family didn't want to provide that medical information or if they simply didn't have any.
Okay, one thing I wanted to show, and I'm going to show it on the screen, hold on a second, is a link that was a guidance that was released by OSPI on March 24th. It's a Q&A provision for special education services for students with disabilities during the COVID. So I'm going to see if you guys can see it. Can you see it?
Not yet.
Yeah, okay, so let me reshare.
And the document that Nicole's talking about is the one that I've referenced several times during this Q&A. And it's designed for school staff, but I think also helpful for families. And this is accessible through OSPI's COVID-19 page. There's a tab at the top that says resources. It's not hard to navigate to find this document and some other ones that OSPI has issued on these topics.
Yes, that's Thank you. That's what I have here.
So actually, Nicole, if you click on that first link on this guidance document, you'll go
Oh,
to OSPI's COVID-19 page.
this one?
Uh-huh.
Okay. There it is.
So this is their page. It's not loaded yet, but there we go. And there's, so see where it says on the left, novel coronavirus guidance and resources. That's where you would find documents like the one that we were just looking at.
Okay.
And so there's also a button right there in the middle that says special education guidance for COVID-19. So you might want to click on that one, Nicole, and show there's a whole set of specific guidance for special education families. There you go. And that novel coronavirus COVID-19 guidance and resources tab that's right above the word special education, that would take you directly to where we just were. You don't have to do it right now because you already showed it. So this is where that information lives. So for the most updated information, if you go to the website first and then navigate toward those PDFs, you'll get the most updated versions. And, you know, this was just issued early this week. So school districts are just also getting this information and sorting through it and trying to troubleshoot a situation that literally no one has ever been in before. This is uncharted territory.
Yes. Yes. Any other questions, everyone? If not, I think we're going to thank you so much for doing this, and we're all learning new technology, so thank you for bearing with us, and we're going to be doing these more as we go along. Thank you to everyone that stayed and listened, and we're going to be showing this with the transcript later on and posting it on our website in case you would like to listen to it again, because there's always little nuggets of information that you didn't hear it before and then you hear it now. So again, thank you everyone, and we'll look forward to me seeing you guys again.
Thank you so much. And you're welcome to email me if you have any direct questions. It's jclark, JCLARK, at wapave.org.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Take care.